My report wasn't just rejected, it was shredded. My badge is currently sitting in a drawer at the station, suspended pending a psychological evaluation, and the town of Blackwood Falls is sleeping soundly, completely unaware of the monstrosity growing in its center, like a cancer. They think I had a breakdown. They think 20 years of graveyard shifts and a divorce finally cracked Declan Reid's mind. But I know what I saw. I know what touched me in the dark. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of night where the rain doesn't wash the world clean, it just drowns it. I was parked near the old logging road, listening to the rhythmic thwack hiss of my wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. The heater in my cruiser was rattling, pumping out air that smelled of stale coffee and wet wool. I've patrolled Blackwood Falls for 2 decades. I know every pothole, every flickering streetlight, and every shadow that stretches a little too far. It's a town swallowed by the Washington Timberlands, a place where GPS signals go to die and people value their privacy more than their souls. The radio crackled, slicing through the hypnotic drumming of the rain. Unit 4 Alpha, come in. We have a 1033, noise complaint and possible prowler at 4400 Cedar Road. I frowned, grabbing the mic. The static bit at my fingertips. Dispatch, repeat address, 4400 Cedar. That's the Kalin property, Marnie. Affirmative, Declan. Caller states they hear screaming coming from the main residence. I stared at the rain warping the world outside my windshield. A cold knot tightened in my gut, an instinct honed by years of seeing things I wished I hadn't. Marnie, check your logs. The Kalin place burned down in '04. There is no main residence. It's a pile of charcoal and rot. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the hum of the dispatch room, safe and warm, miles away. I know what the map says, Declan, but I have a caller ID from a landline at that address. Just go check it out. Probably some kids messing with a generator in the ruins. I signed off, put the cruiser in gear, and peeled out onto the wet asphalt. My headlights cut through the mist like dull knives. The Kalin property had a history that locals didn't talk about. It was the site of a murder-suicide back when I was a rookie. A bad one. Since the fire, it had been a blackened scar on the edge of town, reclaimed by blackberry brambles and aggressive ivy. The drive took 20 minutes. As I turned onto the gravel access road, the woods seemed to close in. The pines here are ancient, monolithic things that block out the moon and stifle sound. I rolled down my window slightly, letting the freezing air keep me alert. The smell of pine needles and wet earth usually calmed me, but tonight the air tasted metallic, like ozone, like the air right before a lightning strike. I rounded the final bend, expecting to see the familiar skeletal remains of the chimney, the only part of the house that had survived the fire. I was ready to chase off some teenagers with a flashlight and a stern warning. Instead, I slammed on my brakes, the cruiser skidding slightly on the mud. My breath hitched in my throat. The house was there, not a ruin, not a burnt shell. It was whole. It stood 2 stories tall, a pristine Victorian farmhouse painted a creamy white that seemed to glow with its own luminescence against the dark tree line. A wraparound porch featured 2 rocking chairs swaying gently in the wind. Warm, golden light spilled from every window, casting long, inviting rectangles onto the overgrown grass. It looked like a dollhouse dropped into the middle of a nightmare. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No crickets, no wind in the trees. Even the rain seemed to mute itself as it hit the roof of the car. I sat there for a full minute, my hand hovering over my holster. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone rebuilt it, but construction takes months. I drove past this road 3 days ago. There had been nothing but weeds and ash. You don't build a 2-story Victorian home in 72 hours. I stepped out of the car. The air was unnaturally warm, radiating from the house like a fever. I unclipped the safety strap on my holster, the leather creaking loudly in the quiet. "Sheriff's Department," I called out. My voice sounded thin, swallowed instantly by the fog. No answer. The rocking chairs on the porch continued their rhythmic, synchronized swaying, though there was no wind to push them. I walked up the path. The gravel was fresh, crunching loudly under my boots. As I got closer, I noticed something about the light coming from the windows. It wasn't the flickering glow of a TV or the steady beam of LEDs. It was pulsing, very faintly, like a heartbeat. I reached the porch stairs. They looked brand new, the wood varnished and polished. I climbed them, the steps groaning under my weight. I approached the front door, a heavy oak slab with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped. To the right of the door was a large bay window. The curtains were drawn, but they were sheer enough to see through. Inside, the living room was immaculate. I saw a fireplace, a floral sofa, and people. There were 3 of them, a father, a mother, and a young daughter. They were sitting on the couch, facing the unlit fireplace, but they weren't moving. They were frozen, stiff as mannequins. Then, as I watched, the father turned his head toward the window. He didn't turn it smoothly. It snapped. Click, like a stop-motion animation missing a few frames. He was looking directly at me, and he was smiling. But the smile was too wide, stretching the skin of his cheeks until it looked like it might tear. I wasn't looking at a family. I was looking at something trying to be a family. I blinked. A hard, deliberate squeeze of the eyelids meant to reset my vision. When I opened them again, the window was empty. The floral sofa sat unoccupied, the cushions plump and undisturbed, as if no one had been sitting there at all. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a stark contrast to the frozen silence of the woods. I told myself it was the rain, the fatigue, the shadows playing tricks on a mind that hadn't slept properly in a decade. But the memory of that smile, the way the skin stretched too tight, the mechanical snap of the neck, refused to fade. It lingered behind my eyes like a burn from a camera flash. I drew my service weapon. The weight of the Glock usually offered comfort, a tangible reminder of authority and control. Tonight, it felt like a toy. I pushed the front door. It swung open silently, revealing a foyer that smelled not of old wood or dust, but of something sterile and sharp, like fresh cellophane and hot electronics. The warmth hit me instantly, a dry, suffocating heat that dried the rain on my face in seconds. "Sheriff's Department," I announced again. My voice didn't echo. The house absorbed the sound, drinking it into the walls. "Is anyone home? I need to check on a disturbance report." I stepped inside, sweeping the flashlight beam across the hallway. To my left was the living room I had seen through the window. I moved into it, boots squeaking on the hardwood floor. Up close, the illusion of normalcy began to fracture. The room was arranged with surgical precision. The coffee table was centered exactly on the rug. The magazines fanned out on top of it were perfectly equidistant. I shined my light on one of the magazines. The cover featured a smiling woman holding a pie, but there was no text. Where the title and headlines should have been, there were just blurred, colorful smears, as if someone had painted the idea of words without understanding what letters were. A cold shiver crawled down my spine, unrelated to the temperature. I reached out to touch a lamp on the side table. It was warm, glowing with a soft amber light, but when my fingers brushed the shade, it was solid, hard, room temperature plastic. There was no bulb underneath, no switch, no cord leading to an outlet. The object wasn't a lamp. It was a single, solid sculpture shaped like a lamp, emitting light from nowhere. "They don't know how it works," a voice whispered in my head. "They only know what it looks like." I backed away, my grip on the gun tightening until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't a renovation. This was a stage set designed by an observer who had never set foot on Earth. As I turned back to the hallway, a flash of blue caught my eye on the mantelpiece. It was a small, framed photograph. I stepped closer, compelled by a sudden, sickening gravity. The picture was of a young boy, maybe 7 years old, wearing a blue baseball cap. My breath stopped. I knew that cap. I knew that face. It was Toby Miller, the boy who vanished 10 years ago from the playground on 4th Street. The case that ended my marriage and started my drinking. I was the first responder. I was the one who found his sneaker in the drainage pipe. We never found the rest of him. I reached for the frame, my hand trembling. "Toby," I whispered. As my fingers made contact, the frame didn't feel like glass and wood. It felt soft, warm, the texture of skin. I recoiled, dropping the frame. It didn't shatter. It hit the hearth with a dull, wet thud, like a slab of meat hitting a butcher's block. "Get out!" my instinct screamed. "Leave, now!" But then I heard it. From deeper in the house, past the kitchen, a sound drifted through the stale air. It wasn't the screaming the dispatcher had mentioned. It was worse. It was laughter. But it was looped. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. It was the same pitch, the same cadence, the same empty inflection repeated with mathematical exactness. It sounded like a recording skipping, but the tone was terrified. It was the sound of someone trying desperately to imitate joy while a gun was held to their head. I couldn't leave. If Toby, or something that knew about Toby, was here, I had to know. The guilt that had hollowed me out for 10 years became a hook, dragging me forward against every survival instinct I possessed. I moved toward the kitchen, the origin of the sound. The swinging door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with the barrel of my gun. The kitchen was brightly lit. The table was set for dinner. 4 plates, 4 glasses of clear liquid. In the center of the table sat a roasted turkey. It was golden brown, steaming, looking like the cover of a Thanksgiving cookbook. I walked past the table, keeping my eyes on the dark doorway at the far end of the kitchen, the entrance to the basement. The laughter was coming from down there. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. I paused by the table. The smell of the turkey was overpowering, but wrong. It smelled like burnt hair. I looked closer at the bird. It wasn't meat. The skin was smooth, devoid of pores or texture. I took a knife from the table setting and poked it. The knife didn't slice. It popped the surface. The turkey wasn't a bird. It was a hollow, pressurized sack. It deflated with a high-pitched hiss, collapsing into a puddle of grey sludge that smelled of sulfur and rot. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. The laughter downstairs stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. Then, a voice floated up from the basement darkness. It wasn't the mechanical laughter. It was a child's voice. Small, trembling. "Officer Reed, is that you? I'm trying to get it right. Did I sound like a happy boy?" The voice was Toby Miller's. I stood frozen, the grey sludge dripping off the table onto the pristine linoleum. The basement door creaked open wider, inviting me into the black throat of the house. The stairs leading down were narrow, carved from rough-hewn timber that felt slick under my boots, coated in a substance that was too viscous to be water and too odorless to be oil. The air grew colder with every step, a sharp, biting chill that stood in stark contrast to the feverish heat of the floor above. The darkness below wasn't empty. It was vibrating. A low-frequency hum, like the sound of a massive electrical transformer, rattled the fillings in my teeth. I kept my weapon raised, though my hand felt numb. The voice, Toby's voice, had not spoken again. I reached the bottom and swept my flashlight across the space. This was no root cellar or storage area for holiday decorations. It was a cavernous concrete bunker, stretching far beyond the footprint of the house above. And it was filled with the blue, flickering light of 100 screens. Televisions. They were stacked in precarious towers, old CRT monitors mingled with sleek flat screens, all wired together in a chaotic web of black cables that carpeted the floor like a nest of snakes. Every single screen was playing something different. I saw snippets of 90s sitcoms, grainy surveillance footage from convenience stores, clips of politicians giving speeches, and home videos of children blowing out birthday candles. The sound was a cacophony of human existence stripped of context. A laugh track overlapped with a scream from a horror movie, a wedding vow merged with a weather report, partly cloudy with a chance of "Until death do us part." Strike 3. I stepped over a bundle of cables, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. In the center of this electronic amphitheater sat a wooden school chair, and sitting in the chair was the boy. He was facing away from me, his small body bathed in the erratic glow of the screens. He was wearing the same striped t-shirt Toby had been wearing the day he disappeared. I remembered the missing person flyer. I had memorized every pixel of it. Toby, I choked out. The name tasted like ash. The boy didn't turn, not yet. He was watching a specific screen directly in front of him. On it, a grainy video played on a loop. A young boy falling off a bicycle, scraping his knee, and crying out for his mother. The boy in the chair watched, and then, with jerking, unnatural spasms, he mimicked the action. He threw his head back. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was practicing the shape of the scream. "Officer Reed," the boy said, but his mouth didn't move to match the syllables. The sound seemed to originate from his chest, projecting outward like a ventriloquist's trick. "You are interrupting the lesson." He slowly swiveled the chair around. I almost pulled the trigger. It was Toby, but it was a Toby drawn by a madman. The features were all there, the freckles, the sandy hair, the gap in the front teeth, but the proportions were wrong. His eyes were set slightly too wide apart, drifting independently of each other like a chameleon's. His skin had the sheen of wet wax. And his jaw hung too low, as if the muscles holding it in place were made of old rubber bands. "What are you?" I whispered, backing away until my heel hit a stack of VCRs. The thing wearing Toby's face tilted its head. A wet, tearing sound accompanied the movement. "I am a memory," it said, its voice shifting pitch, layering Toby's innocent tenor with the deep, gravelly rasp of an old man. "We found him in the woods, a long time ago. He was very educational." It stood up. The movement was fluid, liquid, shedding the jerky roboticism of the father upstairs. It was evolving. "We learn from the pictures," the thing continued, gesturing to the wall of screens. "We learn how to sit, how to eat, how to love. But the pictures are flat. They lack texture." It took a step toward me, then another. I raised the gun, aiming for the center of mass. "Back off! Get on the ground!" The creature smiled. It was the same impossible ear-to-ear grin I had seen in the window. "You are full of texture, Declan. You are full of hurt. Hurt is the loudest feeling. It tastes like copper." Suddenly, the stack of televisions to my right exploded in a shower of sparks. I flinched, turning my head for a fraction of a second. In that blink of an eye, the shadows in the corners of the room detached themselves. I wasn't alone with the boy. The father and the mother were there too. They had been standing in the unlit corners, perfectly still, blended into the darkness like stick insects. Now, they unfolded, their limbs elongated, joints cracking audibly as they stretched beyond human limits. They weren't attacking. They were observing. The father pulled a notebook, a real notebook, from his pocket, and a pen. He looked at me, then at the gun, and began to scribble furiously, his eyes never blinking. "Fear response," the father muttered, his voice a dull monotone. "Pupils dilated, respiration rapid, tremors in the extremities. Subject is priming for violence." They weren't haunting me. They were studying me. I was a lab rat in a maze they had built from my own nightmares. "Let him go," I shouted, pointing the gun at the father now. "Where is the real boy? Where are his remains?" The thing that looked like Toby laughed again, that looped, terrifying sound. "Remains? We use everything, officer. We waste nothing." The boy's face began to ripple. The nose receded, the eyes merged, and for a split second, I saw the raw, grey flesh underneath the mask. Then it snapped back to Toby's face, but this time the expression was one of pure, unadulterated terror. "Help me, Declan!" it screamed, perfectly mimicking the voice I heard in my nightmares for 10 years. "It's dark! It hurts!" It was a weaponized hallucination. They were using my grief to pry me open, to see what made a human break. I fired. The gunshot was deafening in the concrete box. The bullet hit the boy in the chest. There was no blood. Instead, the wound erupted with a burst of blinding white light, as if I had punctured a containment suit holding back a star. The creature didn't fall. It looked down at the hole in its chest. Fascinated. Unexpected, the father murmured, writing faster. Kinetic resistance. Interesting. The light from the wound began to spread, illuminating the rest of the basement. And that's when I saw what was behind the wall of TVs. Piles of clothes, hundreds of them, wallets, ID cards, glasses. This wasn't their first rehearsal. The light pouring from the hole in the boy's chest wasn't just bright, it was heavy. It pushed against me like a physical wave, smelling of ozone and burning sugar. I didn't wait to see if the creature would fall. I turned and scrambled for the stairs, my boots slipping on the slick, unidentifiable fluid that coated the concrete. Behind me, the father's voice remained calm, clinical, cutting through the high-pitched whine of the dying electronics. Locomotion is erratic, coordination degrading due to panic. Note, the subject prioritizes flight over combat. Disappointing. I hit the wooden steps on all fours, clawing my way up. The wood felt wrong under my hands. Soft, porous, pulsating. It was like climbing the throat of a giant beast. "You can't leave yet, Declan." The mother's voice boomed from the darkness below. It didn't sound like a woman anymore. It sounded like a choir of screams layered over the grinding of metal. "We haven't mastered the goodbye. We need to practice the goodbye." I burst through the basement door into the kitchen, kicking it shut behind me. I grabbed the heavy oak table, the one with the deflated turkey, and shoved it against the door. It was a futile gesture, I knew. Whatever these things were, a wooden table wouldn't stop them. But I needed seconds, just seconds. The kitchen had changed. The perfect home facade was failing. The wallpaper was peeling, but it wasn't paper curling off the wall. It was skin shedding. Underneath the floral pattern, the walls were grey, undulating muscle. The refrigerator was humming so loudly it shook the floorboards, and a thick black liquid was leaking from the freezer, pooling around my feet. I ran for the hallway, aiming for the front door. My breath came in ragged gasps, burning my lungs. Get to the car. Get to the radio. Burn this place to the ground. I reached the foyer, my hand outstretched for the brass doorknob. But just as my fingers brushed the cold metal, the door vanished. It didn't open. It didn't break. It simply dissolved into the wall, the wood grain merging seamlessly with the plaster until there was only a smooth, white surface where the exit had been. I slammed my shoulder into the wall, shouting in frustration. Solid, impenetrable. "The architecture is fluid," a voice whispered right in my ear. I spun around, raising my gun. The mother was standing inches from me, but she wasn't standing on the floor. She was hanging from the ceiling, her limbs twisted backward like a spider, her neck elongated, so that her face was level with mine upside down. Her dress defied gravity, hanging down toward the ceiling. Her face was a blur of shifting features. 1 second she had blue eyes, the next brown. Her nose grew and shrank. She was cycling through every face she had ever seen, trying to find one that would make me trust her. "Why do you run?" she asked, her upside-down mouth forming the words with exaggerated precision. "We only want to be good neighbors. We want to fit in. Tell us, how do we look? Do we pass?" "You look like hell," I spat, and I swung the butt of my pistol at her face. It connected with a wet crack. Her face caved in like a rotten pumpkin, but there was no bone, no blood, just a hollow crunch. She didn't scream. She just paused, her distorted face freezing. "Critique noted," she gurgled. "Structural integrity insufficient. Must reinforce the shell." She lashed out with a hand that had too many fingers. I ducked, the limbs smashing into the grandfather clock behind me, shattering it. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the living room, the bay window. It was glass. I could break glass. The living room was dissolving. The floor was turning into a swamp of grey sludge. The furniture was melting into geometric shapes. The illusion was rebooting. I saw the window. Outside, the rain was still falling, dark and beautiful and real. I didn't slow down. I tucked my head, shielded my face with my arms, and threw my entire body weight at the glass. Please be real glass. Please. I hit it. For a split second, the surface resisted, bending like a sheet of thick rubber. I felt a moment of absolute despair, suspended in the elasticity of the trap. Then, the laws of physics seemed to remember themselves. Crass! Shh! The world exploded into shards. I tumbled out onto the porch, rolling across the wet wood and falling onto the muddy grass below. The cold rain hit my face like a blessing. The wind bit at my skin. I was out. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, mud clinging to my uniform. I looked back at the house. It was still there. The lights were still warm and golden. But in the broken window, 3 silhouettes stood side by side. The father, the mother, and the boy. They weren't chasing me. They were waving. Their hands moved in perfect unison, stiff, mechanical waves. Goodbye, Declan. Goodbye, neighbor. I turned and ran. I didn't go for the car. I didn't trust it to start. I ran for the tree line, for the cover of the ancient pines. I ran until my legs gave out, until the house was swallowed by the fog and the night. I collapsed against the trunk of a cedar tree, heaving, clutching my chest. I checked my watch. It was 3 a.m. I had been in there for 4 hours. It had felt like 20 minutes. I grabbed my radio, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Dispatch! Dispatch, this is Reed. Officer down. I need backup at the Kalin property. Now! Static. Then, Marnie's voice, clear and bored. Reed, you're breaking up. What Kalin property? You signed off on a break at the diner an hour ago. I stared at the radio. What? No, I'm at 4400 Cedar. Send everything you have. Declan, she sighed, her voice tinged with annoyance. There's nobody at Cedar Road. We checked the GPS on your cruiser. You've been parked at the Overlook for 3 hours. Are you drinking again? The cold dread that washed over me then was worse than anything inside the house. I looked down at my uniform. It was clean, dry. I touched my face. No mud, no rain. I looked at my gun. The magazine was full. I hadn't fired a single shot. But inside my clenched fist, I felt something sharp. I opened my hand. Sitting in my palm was a single, long shard of glass. And on the tip of it, a drop of grey, glowing sludge was sizzling, burning a small hole in my skin. It wasn't a hallucination. They had just reset the scene. And they had put me back where I started, to see if I would notice. The drive back to the station was a blur of autopilot and adrenaline. I don't remember turning the key or shifting gears. I only remember the burning sensation in my palm. By the time I pulled into the precinct lot, under the harsh buzz of the sodium lights, the shard of glass was gone. It hadn't fallen out. It had evaporated, sublimating into a noxious gas that left nothing but a red, angry chemical burn in the center of my hand. A stigma that looked suspiciously like a stigmata. I stormed into the station, dripping wet. Not from rain, but from a cold sweat that had soaked through my undershirt. The place was quiet, the graveyard shift lulling everyone into a drowsy stupor. Chief Miller was in his office, nursing a lukewarm mug of coffee. He looked up as I barged in, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. Declan, you look like you've seen a ghost. Shift's not over for another 2 hours. I didn't salute. I didn't sit. I walked straight to his desk and slammed my hand down, palm up, showing him the burn. I need to file a report, a 1033, the Kalin property. It's not abandoned, Chief. It's active. Miller sighed, the sound of a man who had had this conversation too many times with a broken officer. Declan, we went over this on the radio. Dispatch checked the GPS. You were at the Overlook. You've been there all night. The GPS is wrong, I shouted, the desperation cracking my voice. Or they hacked it. Listen to me. There were people in there, things. They were rehearsing. They had photos of Toby. They were mimicking us, Chief. Learning how to be human. The room went silent. The other deputies outside the glass office stopped typing. Miller stood up slowly, his face hardening. He didn't look at my burn. He looked at my eyes. "Toby," he said softly, dangerously. "You're bringing up Toby again. Declan, you know the department psychiatrist said, 'To hell with the shrink.'" I grabbed a pen and a notepad from his desk. "I'm writing it down. Every detail. The turkey that wasn't meat. The parents who moved like stop-motion dolls. The basement full of screens. You have to send a SWAT team. You have to burn it down before they leave." I spent the next hour typing the report. My fingers flew across the keys, documenting the impossible physics, the grey sludge, the looped laughter. I poured every ounce of my terror into that document. It was the most important police work of my life. When I handed it to Miller, he didn't even read it. He opened his drawer, pulled out a breathalyzer, and set it on the desk. "Blow," he ordered. "I'm sober," I hissed. "Then you're having a psychotic break," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Go home, Reed. I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a full eval. Give me your badge and your gun." I stared at him. I looked at the report sitting untouched on his desk. I realized then that the monsters didn't need to kill me. They just needed to discredit me. And they had done it perfectly. I slammed my badge and gun onto the desk. "You're making a mistake. They aren't staying in that house. They were practicing to leave." I walked out into the dawn light, a civilian for the first time in 20 years. I went home, but I didn't sleep. I sat by my window with a shotgun across my lap, watching the street, waiting for the grey sludge to seep under my door. But nothing came. The sun rose, bright and indifferent. The birds sang. The world turned as if it hadn't almost ended the night before. Around 8 a.m., I needed coffee. Real coffee. I walked down to the corner diner, the one near the elementary school. The morning rush was in full swing. Mums were dropping off kids. The school buses were hissing and squealing. I stood on the corner, waiting for the light to change, feeling the weight of the town's normalcy pressing down on me. Maybe Miller was right. Maybe the stress finally snapped something in my brain. Maybe the Kalin house was just a ruin, and I had projected my guilt over Toby onto a pile of ash. Then I saw him. A silver sedan pulled up to the curb in front of the school. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, the perfect caricature of an educator. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door for a woman and a young boy. My blood froze. It was them. The features were refined now. The skin wasn't waxy, it was flushed with healthy color. The movements were smooth, liquid, graceful. The glitches were gone, but I knew those eyes. I knew that wide, geometric smile. The man leaned down and kissed the woman on the cheek. It was a perfect kiss. Too perfect. Like it was copied from the end of a romance movie. He ruffled the boy's hair. The boy who looked a little less like Toby now, and a little more like a generic, handsome child. A passing mother waved at him. "Good morning. You must be the new history teacher, Mr. Graves." The thing turned. It looked at her, and then, slowly, its eyes drifted across the street. Straight to me. It saw me. It knew me. It didn't panic. It didn't run. It simply smiled that same skin-stretching smile I had seen in the window of the farmhouse. It raised a hand and gave a stiff, rhythmic wave. "Hello, neighbor." "Yes," the thing said to the mother, its voice a rich, charming baritone that showed no trace of the mechanical loop. "I'm Mr. Graves. We just moved in. We love this town. It feels so alive." The light changed. The crowd moved. The monsters walked up the steps of the school, holding hands, disappearing into the building with 300 children. I stood there paralyzed, while the rest of the world kept spinning. I reached into my pocket for my phone to call the station, to scream, to do something. But my hand brushed the burn on my palm and I stopped. Who would believe me? The report was shredded, the badge was gone, and the monsters, they had learned their lessons well. They passed the test. Blackwood Falls didn't have a haunted house anymore. It had a new teacher, and class was just beginning. So, the next time you see a new face in town, maybe a new neighbor who's just a little too friendly, or a teacher who seems to have practiced their smile in a mirror, take a closer look. Watch how they blink. Watch how they stand when they think no one is looking. Because the scariest thing isn't a monster hiding in the dark. It's a monster standing in the daylight, shaking your hand and asking to borrow a cup of sugar. If this story sent a shiver down your spine, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. I have many more case files from the shadows that I need to share with you, and you won't want to miss them. Tell me in the comments, do you think Declan Reid really saw those things? Or did the guilt finally break his mind? And let me know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Until next time, try not to look too closely at the shadows. They might be looking back.